being a kid and seeing copies of Final Fantasy VII on store shelves and thinking, I can't wait to fight that. Because we, of course, know today it's a Mako reactor, and I found this out when I actually played the game, but if you look at this cover, the Mako reactor does kind of look like a robotic monster. Just a fun little thing. Quite possibly the greatest game ever made, exclaims the back of the box. Game Fan Magazine responsible for that quote. Towers over the competition in terms of graphics, sounds, story, and gameplay, says actual publication GamePro Magazine. Interesting. Let's do this.
Well, this was certainly an experience. Last year, I decided that I was going to replay Final Fantasy VII. I knew that the remake of the game was coming, and I was feeling nostalgic. I hadn't played it in years, nor had I beaten it in well over a decade. I figured, though, that the same thing would happen that always happens when I feel nostalgic for old games. I'd enjoy it for a couple of hours, but then my modern gaming sensibilities would kick in, cause me to become frustrated, and then I'd shut the game off and it would sit until I felt nostalgic for it again. And that sort of happened with Final Fantasy VII. I picked it up in early March of 2016 and played till I got to about Don Corneo's mansion. Then I got frustrated with something in the game and stopped playing it. And it wasn't until the end of 2016 and the start of 2017 that I picked it back up with rare gusto. And after a couple of months of solid playing, I can now say that I've beaten Final Fantasy VII as an adult and as a child, and man, what a difference 20 years makes. Now, I'm going to be as fair as possible here. I understand that a lot of Final Fantasy VII's flaws are the result of it being 20 years old, and also being the product of a very rushed production cycle. People were, and still are, enamored with this game. Some say it's the greatest Final Fantasy to this day, and some even laud it as one of the best games ever made.
And you know what? Good for those people.
I could totally get why people fell in love with the world, with the characters, with the music. There are times in this game where you're blowing away enemies that makes you feel like a badass that can save the planet. Gathering a robust set of characters that you can customize to be whatever you want them to be in battle is a powerful design element. The materia system is masterclass, and I love everything about it. But let's be reasonable here. Best game of all time? Give me a fucking break, this wasn't even the best game of 1997. But that's okay. It doesn't need to be the best game of all time. It doesn't need to be the best JRPG of all time. Hell, it doesn't even need to be the best Final Fantasy. Why? Well, because there's no such thing. The best game of all time doesn't exist. It can never exist, it never has, and it never will. We can come up with as many list videos or nonsensical Game Informer articles as we want. It's a fool's errand to decide in list format the best games ever made. The reason for that is that every game means something different to every person, and most games are so different that it would be impossible to come up with a rubric to grade all of them. To the people that are saying Final Fantasy VII is the best game ever made, what could possibly be your criteria for that? And I'm not asking it to be condescending either. I would assume that it spoke to you in some way. Perhaps it was Aerith's death that hit you emotionally. Maybe defeating Sephiroth gave you a sense of accomplishment. Perhaps going through the ungodly hours of chocobo breeding required for the Knights of the Round I Win button gave you a one-up on a friend that didn't go through all of that. I'm not even going to say that if you played the game now, you'd feel differently because game design has evolved since Final Fantasy VII, and newer games are just better mechanically. That might not be true. Maybe you play Final Fantasy VII every year to reaffirm that it's your favorite game ever made. I mean, hell, if I'm being completely honest, the thought of playing my favorite games again scares me because I'm afraid that I'll play them and my 25-year-old analytical, cynical brain will recognize the flaws and I'll get frustrated and I'll lose my love for some of those titles. I didn't have that fear when I played Final Fantasy VII again. It was never my favorite game. I beat it when I was younger and I moved on with my life. That's why I was always able to put it down when I had felt nostalgic for it before. I would get frustrated with it, stop playing, but it never hurt my overall feelings on the game because it was never on that level for me. And as much as my recent playthrough of Final Fantasy VII infuriated me with its baffling game design decisions, I came out of the experience with a positive thought. And that thought was that I'm going to appreciate Remake that much more. Final Fantasy VII isn't a bad game by any stretch, but the new game will allow me to appreciate just how far we've come in 20 years, and I look forward to that. I mean, let's be honest, I was on the verge of eating the controller numerous times during my playthrough of this game. I tried to use an item or a spell on one of my party members only to not be able to select them because the camera was placed in such a way that the arrow wouldn't allow me to select them. Or the horrendous minigames, and I will fight you on this, but that submarine minigame could suck my left one, and the snowboarding one could suck the right one. I do enjoy the story as well, even though Tifa's reasoning for not telling Cloud about his memories is flimsy as fuck. Oh, and by the way, that final boss fight against Sephiroth, blah. I didn't have Knights of the Round in this playthrough, so my fight with him was quite long, and I did enjoy hearing One-Winged Angel on loop, don't get me wrong, but Sephiroth cast Supernova on me 3 goddamn times. I watched the solar system get annihilated 3 times. Mercury evaporated in front of my face thrice. Actually, that's a lie. I made myself a sandwich the 3rd time he cast it, because I knew I'd have the time. But all that said, I do like Final Fantasy VII. I recognize the flaws in it, but I like the game in spite of them. During some of my more frustrated moments in this game, I thought I was going to be tearing the game to pieces in my review of it, almost taking enjoyment in just being a contrarian. Ooh, everybody loves this game, and I'm going to show them that they're wrong, because a lot of parts of it are bad. But then I realized that that's just as much of a fool's errand as coming up with the best video game of all time. I mean, sure, it might be funny to poke fun at this game's flaws and watch the fanboys come a-screaming with their torches and pitchforks, but I don't think I'd be able to take something like that seriously. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little... You must really enjoy being so positive. I didn't think I was recording Drunken Maid Night. Final Fantasy VIII? I've never beaten this one. Maybe.